Hello everybody. So a lot of people would have heard the news today that in the mushroom trial, Erin Patterson was found guilty today after, I think it was about 8 days of deliberations. Some people had said they were expecting it to be 8 weeks, so comparatively short amount of time, although a lot longer than it took them in the Puff Daddy or P. Diddy trial in America. And so they found her guilty. Now, I had flagged that based on the evidence of what I was aware of, it was not possible to find her guilty legitimately. However, I probably should have put a caveat on that, in that I'm not shown the same evidence that the jury members are. And this is often something to be aware of, that when we get it, with the exception of live trials, so when we get live trials, we're getting pretty much the same as what the jury gets. That's not usual. And this one was not a live trial. It wasn't streamed, videoed, anything like that. So we weren't shown what the jury was. And we saw that, for example, every media outlet in Australia, probably even in the world, said that Ian Wilkinson, the sole survivor, well, besides Erin obviously, that he had claimed that he'd eaten off a set of 4 grey plates, and that Erin had a tan or orange plate. However, that piece of evidence was false. He never actually said that. What he said was that there was a set of 4. He wasn't sure what colour they were. And he said that Erin ate off a rusty plate. And in fact, the evidence from Erin's husband, Simon, was that that was probably the one that was handmade, that her kids had made for her. It was sort of a bit of an arts and crafty sort of thing. He wasn't at the lunch, but that was what he guessed that it was. And that makes sense, because you'd often eat, a lot of parents would eat off a plate that their kids has made for them, even if it's perhaps not the most fanciest one. That it often becomes a sentimental favourite for you. So the fact is that we know for that piece of evidence, which so many people repeated so many times, and they said this is the way that we know that she was definitely guilty. What was reported in the media was not true, because when they did the live blog, if you like, of the judge's directions, he made it clear that it was he did not refer to it as grey plates. He said a set, and it was very clear that he was not referring to it as being grey, and he did not refer to it. The judge, I'm saying, did not refer to it as being an orange or tan plate. He referred to it as being a rusty plate. And so on that piece of evidence alone, we know that what the media were reporting was not what was actually being shown in court. Now, what else they got wrong, we can only speculate. But I know that different media outlets were summarising the judge's directions in quite different ways to each other. And and then they were all getting it quite wrong if you compared it to the live blog. Now, this all suggests that what we were told from the media was probably not very accurate. And whilst there are laws about reporting on crimes, you're not allowed to absolutely lie. There are a lot of things you can do that are not accurate, that are not lying. You just have to portray things in a distorted or slightly unbalanced way. And it seems as if that's what's happened. There are also a number of journalists that had to undo things that they'd reported because they'd reported on them falsely. Now, that's just a simple fact that there were multiple cases where the judge stepped in and put orders, I can't remember what the word is, but injunctions against different media outlets. They were required by law to remove different things, and because they're inaccurate. That's why you often, for a lot of this, you're not seeing a lot of commentary. Well, you probably do now, but you weren't during the trial. So that's the thing, is that what we were shown was not what the jury was shown. So when I have my view, it was based, I obviously was not at the court, and I wasn't seeing what the jury was saying, but I was just seeing the inaccuracies of what was presented, and it seemed to me impossible. Like, the critical piece of evidence to me was that it's impossible to make 6 beef Wellingtons separately before lunch. Even if you cooked them the night before, you wouldn't have room for them, and so forth. And yet that wasn't even mentioned. At least not in any media outlet. It's not to say that it wasn't mentioned, but yeah. And also I thought it was quite critical that there was a very high chance that Simon would have at least wanted to kill Erin, and that he should have been in the defence arguments for potentially he was the provider of the death cap mushrooms. And I think that the defence should have at least suggested that as a possibility, and they didn't. So, not going over so there's 2 issues that I think the defence messed up. And if I was Erin, I would be very disappointed that they, number one, didn't go through the impossibility of cooking 6 separate beef Wellingtons in a single day for lunch with an ordinary oven and an ordinary kitchen. They didn't do a trial run with that. And the second one was that they didn't even suggest the possibility that Simon, her husband, could have planted the death cap mushrooms in her fridge. I think both should have been suggested by the defence. And of course, I don't know if they might have been, or they might have if they didn't actually present them. They certainly weren't in the media, but doesn't mean they weren't argued, because we don't know what bits the media were not showing. So there was a chance that they did show at least the bit about Simon potentially having caused the deaths. Obviously he wouldn't be aiming to kill his own parents, but he would be aiming to kill Erin, and somehow that went wrong, which I think is a lot more plausible than the idea that she killed her in-laws. But we don't know also, just because on the evidence there was no suggestion that she had any reason to do it, it doesn't mean that the jury weren't shown that, because it's plausible that they were. And if she did have motive, then there is a possibility that she could be guilty. And perhaps there was an argument presented that, again, wasn't presented to the media, that showed how she could cook 6 beef Wellingtons and why they think that she did do it. She did cook 6 beef Wellingtons. Just because it wasn't in the media doesn't mean that the jury weren't shown it. So we're left with 2 possibilities. Number one is that I'm wrong, and that the jury were shown something that wasn't in the media. Now, if that's the case, it's not really me being wrong, it's just me not having the full picture. I was relying on what the media said, and perhaps the jury was shown something else on top of that, a compelling argument that convinced them, absolutely. The second option is that the jury gigantically messed up. And I think if that's the case, I think it draws parallels with the George Pell case. In the sense that, and obviously it was a completely different type of crime, but George Pell won his appeal. It was actually quite lengthy and expensive for him to win the appeal. But the reason he won the appeal was that the appeals judge found that there was no chance for that to be an accurate verdict. Now, they didn't say that the jury stuffed up, but essentially they did. That's what that means. So and this was presented in the media after he was found guilty. It was presented that there was no chance that the evidence, and this evidence was not shown in the media during the trial, but afterwards somebody, I believe someone from the church, showed that it wasn't possible for him to, because of the simple fact in that one he couldn't have changed his clothes quickly enough. And they actually showed that to the jury, and the jury ignored it, and the media didn't present it. So, and that was the thing that, I mean, even I thought he was guilty at the time, because I wasn't shown what the jury was shown. But when I saw that evidence, I thought, well, he was not guilty, and the jury messed up, and that proved to be the case. Now, again, I don't know every single thing that the jury was shown. There is the chance, and certainly there were cases which I worked on in which people thought it was completely unjust what the verdict was. And I found that that was just because they were listening to what the media said. And if they'd actually been in court and actually had the evidence, the chances of them stuffing up is actually very low, a lot lower than people think. And the chances of the jury stuffing up is extremely low. So with that in mind, there is a decent chance that the jury were shown something that the media chose not to report on. Which they don't have to report on. They can choose which bits they think are relevant. And I mean, you do have grounds that the defence poorly represented her. And I think there's those two examples that I gave about the not doing a reenactment. You normally have reenactments, especially for something like this. It would be absolutely essential to do it for this case. They did a reenactment in the George Pell case, but the media didn't report on the reenactment. Interesting, wasn't it? The media acted as if there was no reenactment. Now, if they did a reenactment in this case, but the reenactment actually proved that she could have made 6 separate beef Wellingtons, and again, the media didn't present this, that would have actually led to her being much more likely to be found guilty than what I was aware of, because media chose not to present that. And, you know, if doing that sort of reenactment could have done it. I mean, people in the public, members of the public, aren't even aware if she cooked the dish the night before and just reheated it. They're not aware of how big a fridge was. They're not aware of all sorts of things, which, the thing is, these sorts of facts don't rely on whether or not she tells the truth. They rely on, you know, just simple facts of how big the kitchen is, how big the fridge is, how big the oven is, how possible it is to do it. So if she could have cooked it, then that makes it much more likely that she could be guilty. And the other thing is that if potentially there was some chance that she had not eaten the meal, then, you know, maybe there was something the jury was shown that the media chose not to report on that proved that she definitely didn't eat the meal. Again, that was not shown to the media. So I'm in two minds here as to whether the media were misreporting, and I know the media were misreporting a lot, and that there was something that they missed that the jury was shown that sealed the deal. Now, most people in the general public and in the media say she was 100% guilty based on what the media's reported, which makes it pretty unlikely that they had something else that made her actually convince the jury that she was guilty, but the media chose not to report that. You'd think they would. So with that in mind, I think most likely this was a jury error. And I said that I thought most likely if she was found guilty, it would be because the jury had been influenced by the media. Now, it's also notable, they originally had 15 jury members. Now, they had 12 plus 3 alternates. One of the alternates was removed, so they ended up with 14, because they'd been looking at the media about this case and telling people about it. So that suggests that there was a very strong possibility that the remaining 14 jurors were influenced by the media, because they would have at least been influenced by that one that was dismissed. And I don't know how much they might have already known about the case and had views about it before it started. I mean, it was an 8-day deliberation, so that tells me that there was a while where there was at least one, probably 2 or 3 people who didn't want her to be found guilty, and that they eventually caved into pressure and went along with it. Because this is what happens. I mean, if you're in a jury, and I've never been in a jury, by the way, but not allowed to because of my expertise, but well, there were a couple of times I was allowed to early on in my life, and I just didn't end up being picked. But now I think my chance of ever being selected in a jury are pretty low. Is when you get to a certain amount of knowledge, you just don't get to be a jury member. But anyway, so basically, if you're in the jury and you don't know this person, you're probably just going to want to leave. I went for 9 weeks, which was way too long. I don't think it needs to be anywhere near that long. And then if they're deliberating for 8 days, you'd say, well, no, she's definitely not guilty, but I'm sick of arguing. Now, I'd say probably they had a majority that wanted to find her guilty, and I'd say there were 2 or 3 holdouts. Now, you don't know, because sometimes it actually is the other way, and it could well have been that there were 9 or 10 people that said she was not guilty, but the people that said she was, maybe 2 or 3, just really harassed them until they all changed their mind and just wanted to go home. And that can happen, and that's legal. That's not illegal. You're allowed to do that, because in the end, I mean, you're in the jury, you want to go home at some point. And it is notable that there were a number of legal experts that were saying that they didn't think she'd be found guilty, and a number said that it would be a hung jury. So there were those opinions. I haven't seen every single legal opinion, but certainly I didn't see any from any lawyers or any legal experts that said that they expected her to be found guilty. So there were members of the public that thought that. So that really all does suggest that this was a wrongful conviction. Now, if she was to appeal, she'd have 2 avenues. One is that she had poor representation on those 2 parts, but again, I don't know why those 2 things weren't shown. If the defence lawyer tried to show them and they were blocked by the judge, then that's an error by the judge, not by the defence lawyer. It's still an error. It's still grounds for appeal. But I think quite likely and quite crucially, it's probably more likely to be jury error because of jury manipulation by the media. It definitely looks like that. I'd say it looks like that more than the George Pell one. Now, that doesn't mean that she'll win an appeal. George Pell had effectively unlimited money. She doesn't. She might have run out of money. She might just be happy to just put up with it. It also will depend on the sentence. If she gets 2 or 3 years, and I'm not saying she will get 2 or 3 years, but she might. If she gets 2 or 3 years, she might just put up with it. And also, there's no guarantee she'll win an appeal just because it was a wrongful conviction. It's very difficult to win an appeal, even if you're completely right, because you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was wrong. In other words, you have to prove that you're 100% innocent, not just that you're 20% innocent or 10% innocent. You have to be 100% innocent to win an appeal. I think she can get that, but it's not a guarantee. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye-bye now.